Hello and welcome. This lecture we're going to be sorting out the colliders on our barrels so that we can stack them up properly, as you can see here, and have fun just plowing into them and knocking them down. Let's dive in and see how this is done. Okay, so I would like to be able to stack items on top of this rack. Now, we can do this fairly straightforwardly by just getting a barrel and dragging it onto the rack, and you can see Unreal automatically tries to position it on top, and we can do that effectively. Then we can hit Simulate Physics, and we can hit Play and see that it jumps around a little bit, but not massively. So that's quite cool, and we can now shoot at the rack and have everything fall down in the process. It's funny, it's kind of got its legs stuck in the ground though, which is a little bit annoying. We will work on tweaking some of these bugs. It may well be that the mesh is a little bit too far on the ground. If we select the mesh and the barrel and bring it up slightly, then it shouldn't be penetrating the ground and hopefully won't get stuck in the way that it just did. And we've got a little bit of a fun setup that we can knock stuff over. However, you will notice if you tried, or did try earlier, to stack these barrels on top of each other, they can get pretty unstable pretty quickly. Even if we give them a little bit of separation so that we know they aren't clipping into each other and popping because of that reason, if we give them a little bit of separation, let's select them both because they haven't got physics enabled. Let's select them both and add physics. If I duplicate this, bring up another level, and make sure my tower is nice and straight. And if we hit play now, we see that it pops up in the air like this and is incredibly unstable. So why is it doing this? Why is it being so unstable? Now, the reason for this is because of collisions and the way collisions are calculated in Unreal. There is a mesh here, which is essentially, let me show you what a mesh is actually. If we go to the viewport and hit the button that currently says lit and select wireframe instead, this is what the mesh is. This is essentially what the computer is seeing and rendering for us with the application of materials. So you can see there's this complicated looking mesh for the barrel, but this isn't what is used for physics. No, for physics there is a simplified version of this mesh to make physical calculations a lot easier. So if you click where it now says wireframe instead, we can change the view mode down to player collision. And this shows us the simplified collision mesh. And you can see it's a little bit wonky, it's a little bit jagged and not ideal for having clean collisions. So we can change this. We can modify the collision mesh fairly easily in Unreal by going to the content drawer and selecting our barrel mesh and double clicking it, which brings up the static mesh editor. And we can see what the mesh is like. We can kind of click on it. We can look at the wireframe view again by clicking on lit and switching to wireframe or switching to player collisions. And what we can do is there is a collision button in the toolbar, and we can click on that and click remove collisions, which is going to remove any collisions that are currently there, such as slightly janky collisions. If we go back to the main level, you can see there's now no mesh visibles in our player collisions. And if we hit play, you can see they just pass straight through the floor because there's nothing for them to collide with. So what we need to do is go back to our mesh editor and select the collision drop down again. And we can add in a simplified collision that is going to be much better suited for this. And what we want to do is add the 10 DOP Z-axis simplified collision. Now, let me just explain this. In fact, the tooltip kind of explains this. It says it generates a new axis-aligned box collision mesh with 4 Z-axis aligned edges beveled and 10 total sides. That's pretty confusing, but if I add it in, it might make it a little bit clearer. I've added in, you can see this is what the mesh actually looks like, and you can see what it sort of meant by Z-axis aligned. Most of its complexity is around the Z-axis trying to wrap around this barrel, and it's flat on the tops and the bottoms, which is exactly what you want really when you're trying to model a barrel. So I'm pretty happy that that's a good collision mesh. We can now save the mesh, go back to our level, and you can see that the player collision view is showing us the new collision mesh, which is a lot simpler and less deformed. So I can now switch the view mode back from player collision to lit, and we can see all the lighting and materials, and we can go ahead and hit play now, and you can see that these barrels are a lot more stable than they were previously. Obviously, when I go ahead and hit them, they aren't anymore. So I'm going to challenge you to create a blueprint barrel class here so that we don't have to go and change settings on every single barrel all the time. So go and click that convert to blueprint button. Just a reminder, it's the one in the details pane that looks like a little tiny blueprint graph. Then you're going to keep the defaults and just change the name. And remember that we use the BP underscore naming convention. I'd like you to increase the barrel mass. At the moment, they're very flimsy and fly around very easily when hit, and build a wall out of this barrel class and have fun knocking it over. Pause the video and have a go. Okay, welcome back. So let's create a barrel class, shall we? So I'm going to take one of these barrels and I'm going to hit the convert to blueprint. Then I'm going to change the name to BP underscore barrel. And I'm going to change the path as well so that it's in the root of the content folder, and hit select. Then it's going to automatically open up our newly created class. I'm going to dock this to the main window, and I'm going to go and select the static mesh components, scroll on down to the physics section, make sure physics is enabled. It is. I'm going to increase the mass to about, I think 1000 in my testing has been quite fun in the past, and I'm going to save the blueprint. And now I'm going to delete the barrels that I currently have in my scene because I want to use my new barrel class instead. Then we're going to go ahead and open up the content drawer and drag in a barrel instance into our scene. And I want to stack these up into a wall. Before I do that, I'm going to stick them inside a folder. So I'm going to right click in the outliner on the newly created barrel, and I'm going to select the move to option, create new folder, and I'm going to call this barrel wall with no spaces, just because that's my preference there. And then selecting that barrel, I'm going to alt click on the Z axis to drag the barrel up and then repeat, and probably one more time to make it nice and tall. Then selecting all four of those, I can duplicate out to the side a couple of times. Then selecting all the barrels in the outliner and moving myself to the side, I can alt click on the red arrow to bring a couple of rows backwards of my barrels, like so. And we probably want some stacked here on top of the rack as well. So let's go back to a content drawer and drag in from there a couple of barrels for our rack and some for the top as well. And while we're at it, let's stack a few of these on top of each other. Should make them more fun to knock down when we do. So let's play and see what this looks like. So I've got my barrel wall dominating here in front, and I've got the rack. Let's try shooting at the rack. Well, that's very satisfying to knock those over. And then we can shoot at this barrel wall as well and create a lovely bit of carnage. Now, you may notice that occasionally the ball goes flying through the walls or the barrels, and this is because it's moving so fast that the physics simulation doesn't really keep up. Now, we won't be fixing it in this section. It's a little bit beyond the scope of what we're trying to do. So one thing you can do to ameliorate this if you want to is to reduce the speed of the balls, and it'll happen less often. Great stuff. So hopefully you've enjoyed putting some barrel physics in here and getting the colliders working, and I'll see you in the next lecture.